We're going to look at developing a Java application with a graphic user interface. We're going to use the Swing framework. There are other approaches to developing Java applications with the graphical user interface. Swing keeps it kind of simple. I'm not saying it's necessarily the best approach, but it does mean it's a relatively straightforward way of learning how to develop a graphical user interface. So we'll start with an empty project, as usual. What we're going to do though is we're going to add a form to our application. So I'm going to right click on the package, I'm going to go to new, and I'm going to go down and find the Swing UI Designer and choose a graphical user interface GUI form. Okay, and then we're going to make a kind of a simple hello world graphical user interface. So I'm just going to call it we'll call it greeting form, I think, maybe greeting form. There are different ways of how things can be laid out in when we build a form. I'm going to stick with this kind of grid layout manager that IntelliJ provides, which kind of puts things, kind of imagine like putting things in cells in Excel. So it kind of builds a sort of grid. As I say, you can explore the others at your leisure. And the other thing we have the form itself, and then we have a class that is bound to the form. So we can programmatically modify the elements in the form and deal with, for example, actions that take place in the form. So I'm going to say OK to this. Okay, and you can see it's opened up this greeting form here, and there are all sorts of user interface components that we can add to that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is going to drag over a label, I think, and we will use it to put an instruction in. So I'll put label up here. I'm just going to modify that label and just say enter your name. And then beneath that, I'm going to put in a J text field. You'll notice a lot of these start J. In fact, pretty much all of them do. So J text field gives me an editable text field. So I'm going to pop that in immediately below that one. You can see that's popped it there. And I'm going to pop a button below that. You can see we can end up splitting things in half. You can see if I drag through a button here, it's going to put it, and it's going to give me space the other side. So you can have multiple things in a sort of in a grid, and this spans two, but that spans one of those two, and you can put something else here. But I'm going to take that out for now. I've just done undo there, and then what I'm going to do is put another label in, and we're just going to say like hello, and then hello to the person who has typed their name. Okay, so I'm going to take the text out here that says label. You can see there's like fields for it down here. You can see the text there. So we're gonna delete that. You can do other things like change the alignment and so on and so forth. But that's kind of the setup for what we want to do. Now the other thing is we want to be able to reference these or talk to these using code. Okay, we don't need to modify what says into your name, nor do we need to change this vertical spacer. But this text field, we're going to collect their name. So I'm going to give it an ID. I'm going to put it name text field. Okay, and I'm just going to my button because there is only one button. If we had more than one button, we might do a bit more. I might change the text on the button just to say something like press me. And then this label is going to be the greeting label, so I'm going to give that field name of greeting label. Okay, so we've now got our UI configured reasonably nicely, and what we can do is start writing some code to get that set up. Now, one thing just to mention is in order to be able to do that, the panel, which is everything it sits in, also needs a field name. Okay, so I tend to go with root panel because it kind of sits at the root of our form, but it doesn't have to be called that. Okay, so there we go, that's our form. If I now go to the Java file for our form, and you can see in the navigator here, you've got the Java file. You can see the C for class, greeting form, and then you've got the form itself. If I go to this, you can see that it's added in a text field called name text field, a button called button, a greeting label called greeting label, and a root panel. We don't see this because we've not given an identifier, and because we don't need to modify it in any way. It will still exist, it just isn't accessible from within the Java class. Okay. I guess we could try running it, but we'll probably find that absolutely nothing happens, because if you think about what happens when we run things, we run our main, and currently there's nothing created in our main. But even if we did create a greeting form in our main class, we've actually got to do some configuration. We need to create a constructor for our greeting form and do a little bit of setup to make it work. Okay, so in fact, let's put the constructor under our fields. So constructors with public, our class is called greeting form, so you can say public greeting form. And this is kind of the sets of setup we need to do to ensure that our form actually appears. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to say we want to create a J frame. Okay, we'll just call it frame for now. It's going to be a new J frame, and we can provide a title. So if you think about here, we're using the application. There's the title for the application. In fact, actually, sorry, no, I lie. That's the title of the window. The title for the application is up here. It says IntelliJ IDEA. So we might call this one Greeter. Okay, because it's going to greet people. We then need to tell the frame what its content is. So we say set content pane, and we pass in the root panel. So we know the root panel is that panel we've got there. Okay. We can also tell the frame what to do if it's closed. Okay, so if we say set default close operation, now you might think, well, surely when you close it, it closes. But if you think about, particularly on a Mac, if I close this window, it doesn't necessarily close the application. Okay, some applications it will, others will leave the application running but just close the window. Okay, so we can say in this case, we've got various options. If you do jframe dot, you can see these constants here. We've got exit on close, so that will close the application. We could say hide, we could say do nothing. I'm just going to say exit on close, so it closes the application fully. Okay. Next thing we need to do is to tell the window to fit everything, or to fit the window to the size of its contents. So to do that, we say pack. Okay, and then finally we need to make it visible. If we don't make it visible, we can't see it, so we say set visible, and we say true. So these are kind of standard things that you need to do. So chances are you might just use these. You know, obviously you might change the title, but you might set these up the same way for each form, unless you wanted to do, for example, have it when you close it do something different. Okay, so we're almost there. The only kind of thing that's remaining to do is actually to say that when we start our application, we create a greeting form, and literally all we need to do for that is to say greeting form equals new greeting form. Okay, and the program now won't exit until we close that form. So if we launch it, okay, all being well somewhere or other. Okay, it's launched to my other screen. I'm going to drag it across. You can see here it says greeter. Okay, I got it wrong actually. So the greeter is the title. It's the title of the window. It's taken the application name from here, so it's just main.java. So we've got enter our name. I can type Andrew in that because that functionality is already given to us in the text field. But if I press the button, nothing happens. Okay, so how do we go about adding some interactivity to our form? Okay, well, what we need to do is to create some custom logic for the button. Okay, and what we actually need to do is we need to create something called an action listener. Okay, now action listener already exists as a class, so we could sort of create a class that subclasses action listener and build the behavior we want, but that's kind of complicated because in reality what we want it to do is to update the greeting label, having read the name text field. Okay, so we need access to the things that are in this class as well. So what we can do is we can say button, that's our button, add action listener, okay, and then rather than subclassing action listener, we can say, well, we want a new action listener. Okay, we're used to writing whatever equals new action listener. Okay, but when I hit enter there, and just undo that, what it's doing is it's essentially inlining the code for the action listener class. So we're subclassing action listener. An action listener has the action listener class has a method called action performed, and I said the class is actually an interface, and we would implement that action perform method so that when someone presses a button, something happens. Okay, you don't necessarily need to remember all this because IntelliJ will give us the code. Okay, and we'll look at things like this in future in later years. But I'm going to create this action listener here, and you can see we've got action performed. So we're implementing the action performed method of the action listener interface. Okay, and what we do here is write code to execute when button is pressed. Okay, well, what do we want to happen? We want to set the text of the greeting label to hello plus the text from the name text field. So we could say something like string message equals hello plus, and then we want to go to our name text field, which is called name text field. A name text field has a method to get the text from it. Okay, so we can do get text. That'll get us the text that's typed into that. And then all we want to do is to go to our greeting label and set its text to be the message. Okay, but you probably noticed in my application that's running, you can't see the label. Okay, so I'm just going to run it and you'll probably see nothing happens again. So let's stop it. Let's restart it. I might have to drag it across again. Yeah, I'm going to drag it across. So I can put Andrew. I can press a button, but nothing happens. Okay, and that's because we haven't repacked the items into the view. So if I come back and I say frame.pack and run it again, if I restart it, if I do Andrew, press a button, you can see it repacks it, and we can see the label that we've got in there. Okay, and you can now see it because before it didn't have a value, so it didn't have any text in it, so it didn't take up any space. When we repack it, it makes sure it's got space for what it's displaying. Okay, so that's basically it. There are, as I say, numerous things we can add to our forms. We've got checkboxes, we've got things that allow us to scroll, we've got text areas for viewing text panes as well. We've got like drop down boxes, comment box, we can put tables in, we can put lists in. So there are all sorts of UI components. Really what you want to do is to explore them. There's plenty of documentation for Java Swing, so you can find out what the various things do. You'll probably recognize them from using computers. We're used to using things like drop down boxes, text fields, buttons, and so on and so forth. Obviously you might at some point decide that, well, actually we want this button to open a new window. Well, that's relatively straightforward. You just create another form, and then you could, in this code here, just create a new instance of that other form and have that launch. So there's all sorts of things you can do to build quite comprehensive applications. So there you go. That's a very brief, lightweight introduction to the Swing UI Designer in Java.